Luella Banks, and I am delighted to be here. I am here on account of I have had a revelation that rocked me so deep I am spreading it across the United States like mayonnaise on Wonder Bread. Last summer, my husband Gerald, my family, and myself, we were spending time at church camp like we do every summer to expose our boys to the glories of Jesus Christ in a place they might find a little more comfortable than the pews at our church. Gerald and the boys were down by the lake, and I had gone back to the cabin. I was sneaking myself a little sponge bath. Now this is where the story really begins. I was singing hymns as I always do when I bathe, but the particular hymn I was singing, there is wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. When all of a sudden, my sponge came up red. Understand, ladies, I was brought up a good Christian girl. Modesty had always been my virtue. Well, Gerald and I never talked about my female times. If I accidentally bled on our sheets, well, I turned them into rags. That is the kind of shame I felt. That is the kind of woman I was. So you can imagine the panic I felt when that little sponge came up red and I had no provisions. How could I have let this happen? It was all a part of God's plan. But I didn't know that then. I went on down to the canteen. They were all out of female products. I discreetly asked a few of the ladies. No one had anything. So I told God was sending me into uncharted waters. So I told Gerald, I said, Mommy was going on a little adult adventure. He didn't ask, I didn't offer. I drove through the wilderness. I drove for miles, wishing I could leave a little salt trail so I could find my way back. And just when I was thinking, I drove for miles, wishing I could find my way, and just when my pants were starting to get a little moist, and I was thinking I was going to have to reupholster the car, well, there was a little store no bigger than my front room. I prayed and pulled over. Salvation, I hoped. Well, when I pushed the door open, a little bell rang as if to announce my presence. Two big, rough men stopped talking long enough to see who had entered, and then they went back to their conversation. Well, they were talking about rifles and ammo and hunting. I looked around and I realized I was in kind of a hunting bait shop. There was a girly picture up behind the register. They might as well have had a sign on the door that read, "No girls allowed." I could not have felt more uncomfortable. The Lord had planned this place for my revelation. When I went over to the first aid section, and God bless, there they were. They even had those nice little plastic applicators that I like so much. Thank you, sweet Jesus. When I reached down to pick them up, the man over at the register burst into laughter, although they could not possibly have seen what I was reaching for. My palms began to sweat. My throat began to constrict. Little beads of sweat began to form on my upper lip. I knew I would never find the courage to walk over to that register. Then my attention dropped below my waist and I knew I had no choice. I have no memory how I got over to that register. I do know when I placed that box of tampons on the register, that hunting conversation dropped dead. You could hear a pin drop. I could hear my heart pound. It was a shame no woman should have to feel. There we all were, just looking at that box. I lifted my eyes to see the girly picture of the young woman with breasts so large, her shirt was ripping, lips too big to be natural, and eyes that were just looking out all lonely. And although I felt repulsed by her, I also took comfort, being she was the only other woman. I looked at the gentleman as if to say, could we please get on with this? But they had gotten all fumbly. The one man, he reached behind his ear for a pencil, and he somehow knocked it to the floor. They both bent over to pick it up. They cracked their heads. And in that moment, thank you, sweet Jesus, I saw the silliness of the situation. While those two big men were afraid of those little things. The one man grabbed the bag. I knew he wanted to put the tampons and the thought of my bleeding out of his sight. And then God released my throat and spoke through me. I don't need a bag. I said as if I was proud of my bleeding. And then, inspired by the woman in the picture, who I now recognize as the Mary Magdalene, I'll put one in right here. Right here, one of the tacks that was holding her to the wall popped out and it fell to the floor. And both of those men jumped. And I smiled and said, it was a joke, boys. And I smiled and walked out. The blood on my legs was burning like it was on fire. And then I began to sing, there is power, wonder-working power in the blood. But now this time, the lyrics changed. It went, and the blood of the womb. God was telling me there was power in my blood. The blood I had been afraid to speak of, I had been singing about my whole life. Now, my mother taught me that song, and her mother taught her. We did not know our blood was powerful too. Now, ladies, we all know the uncomfortable part of our monthly time, but let me tell you, there is extraordinary time in that power too. In that time, remember, we are also creators. Thank you very much. My name is Luella Banks. Have power in your blood. Thank you very much. There's power in your blood. Thank you.